Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Loading Screen podcast. This is episode 1 again. If we haven't met, my name is Aaron. This is my podcast about games, game development, and my game development journey. Today we're going to do a little bit of catching up. First, I'm going to talk about some points that I wanted to clarify from my intro. This is 00, if you will. Then we'll get into the bulk of the episode of us catching up and what I've been up to since the last episode. And then I'll conclude with some life and what I've been doing maybe this week or in recent memory. And let's get into it. So the one thing I wanted to talk more about was why I chose a podcast versus another medium. And it really boils down to 3 things. First is simplicity, editing, and consistency. So let's start with simplest. I want this to be as simple as possible for me. I don't want to spend too much time on this. And that leads kind of into the editing as well, because as we'll get into, editing can take a really long time to do. And it is not my, I'll say, forte, but it is almost like a necessary evil that needs to be done in order to produce good content. So that's where I'm at. And I want to reduce that, I'll say, hurdle by just making it as simple as I can. This is a hobby for me, so I want to be able to do this with not a lot of stress and make sure that it is something that I can keep enjoying doing, and that honestly follows my game dev as well. Since game dev is really the driving force, and this podcast I'm using more of as a supplement to it to document my journey. It does a little bit of marketing too, but I also want to document more of the advice and the value that you get for it. As far as versus other mediums, I have tried YouTube. I made a couple of videos and it's just not my thing. I know game dev YouTube is a very big market per se, or segment, if you will, of where you do devlogs, you do educational content. It's really you're doing things for more of the entertainment sake, and the marketing is a byproduct, a supplement to that. And as far as like the third and final point of reason why I chose a podcast is consistency. I want to be able to make something that I can continue to do and not do it, I'll say, one-off. With game development, which we'll get into, I've done it over a very sustained period of time, really just as a hobby. And I want to make sure I can keep this as a hobby and make sure that I don't really add any more hurdles to it, but more of I want to reinforce game dev, where I want this to inspire my game dev and my game dev to inspire this. And we kind of talk about the journey and the adventure along the way. I wanted to clarify that and maybe give some more context to that. And then now let's get into the bulk of what I want to talk about, which is catching up. So like I mentioned earlier, I was revamping this podcast. The last episode I released was in December 28th of 2021. And for context, it is July 13th, 2024. So that's around 2.5 years of time in between. And I wanted to really just share what I've been doing. So I'll kind of just get into it. So I'll start with actually not December of 2021, but June of 2021, which is 6 months before the release of the first episode. And this is important because that's when I actually started to record episode 1 with Yoni. And at this time in June of 2021, I had been also working on a bridge since August of 2020. So 10 months at this point. And when I started a bridge, I really anticipated it to be this very short project. I was expecting it to take maybe 6 months. And that was really it. Maybe, in 2021, I would release it. We make this thing, and we move on. That's a very big oversight in hindsight. A fun fact I learned about researching this episode was that I did not do any revision control in 2020. So from about August of 2020, that is, to January 2021, which is about 4 months, a bridge just wasn't on revision control, which I use Git. So that's a big no-no if you're in the software development and in programming space. So I do not recommend doing that. I recommend getting your revision control set up as soon as possible, as soon as you make the project. But let's continue. So it's June of 2021. I record the episode with Yoni. Then in July of 2021, I moved back from the Bay Area to Southern California to work from home. Then in August of 2021, I make a Snakes clone in Unity and another clone using C++ and an SFML. And this is really just a personal thing to see. Like, I wanted to learn more about C++, and I was really interested in game engines and really just how they worked. So it kind of I wanted to do a compare and contrast of what their experiences were. Then in October of 2021, I participated in the R Solo Development Halloween Game Jam, where my entry was Pay Respects. It's like an RPG adventure, but without the combat. I'll say you have quests. Basically, you have to solve really small mysteries. You have to gain things, take them to people, and it kind of progresses as you go. I really enjoyed it, and there's a funny story I have about this, about exporting, which I might talk about later. So the reason this is important is from July of 2021 to December of 2021. So everything from moving to doing the game jam and whatnot. I was editing this podcast, and I was going back with Yoni about it here and there. And Yoni, absolute champ. He was giving me really good feedback about this. He gave me insight of what things to look at. And we just went back and forth for 6 months about this. And by December of 2020, really at the end of it, when I released it, I was really tired and frustrated of podcasting in general. It really felt like this ball and chain, if you will, that it was just this really long slogging process. And I think that really set an expectation for podcasts as like this almost kind of annoying thing of like, it's going to take you a lot longer. And from game dev, I did realize things do take a lot longer, hence my development for a bridge, which I was also developing at this point. But it just didn't leave me off on a right foot. And so after this episode, I'll say essentially just abandoned the podcast. And this is the reason why. It's just because of that back and forth, and that feedback loop was a lot higher than I was anticipating. And I feel like I couldn't provide that level of value and consistently if I did want to do game dev at the same time. I decided to drop it. So from then on, so we're at January about 2022, I basically took a break from game dev, and I started to dedicate myself more to writing blogs, which I was scheduling for about once a month. I would write a blog about a very specific topic. It could be about discounting, staying motivated, bundling on Steam, things like that. And I also decided I was going to read books more and be, I'll say, more of a student to game dev. So I just started reading a lot more about game dev, business, and a little bit of self-help. And another attribute of that is I was on my phone quite a bit, and I still am a little bit to this point today, but not as much as I was. And I felt like I wanted to be a little more productive and not be on my phone, so I thought reading books was a good alternative. In February 2022, I released a demo for a bridge, and the reason I released a demo was to participate in Steam Next Fest. And if you don't know, Steam Next Fest is a small festival, if you will, that Steam actually hosts, where indie games that are releasing soon, the rules have changed here and there, could be showcased on Steam in their own little section on the actual Steam store in Steam page to basically show them off and see what games are upcoming. And I was really looking forward to this. At the time, wish lists on Steam are a very big thing. Almost the most important thing on Steam besides the actual game. And going into it, I had about 82 wish lists, which is not a lot in hindsight. But at the time, I thought that was pretty good, considering I had done basically no marketing. And I'm obviously not a marketer. Game design, game programming are basically my fortes and specialties and things I like to do with respect to game development. So I was really happy with this at the time. This is not great by any means, but it was what I was working with at the time. But by the end of it, I had 219 from 82. So that's about 2.6 times. And that was very impressive to me. And it really showed me the power of Steam and participating in these small festivals that Steam actually hosts, specifically Next Fest. At the same time, I did take a break from a bridge. I was pretty burnt out. It had been quite a bit of time at this point. I remember playing a lot of other games from the Steam Next Fest, writing little tweets about them, sharing what I liked about them. So that was really a fun time. I also made like a 2D mini game that you would see in like a Mario Party style game. And I called that with Jump, Bounce, Win. And that was a fun little project. In March of 2022, I planned actually to release a bridge at this time, but it just was not ready. So I decided to move back to June. However, then when June came around, I realized this thing is still not ready. A bridge is still just not the game I had really envisioned. So I decided to move the release back once again to September. Then in July of 2022, I participated in the GMT Game Jam, where the theme was Roll of the Dice. And there I made a game called FPS The Game Show. And this game was actually a game I was actually enjoyed quite a bit. It felt really good to play. I really focused on the 3D platformer aspect of implementing things like Coyote Time. And I believe I did maybe a little bit with input buffers and just those things that make platforming feel good. Unfortunately, I overscoped the game and the project, so it is very underbaked in terms of its tutorialization and the features, and how I implemented the theme was basically when you complete the main loop, which is you shoot turrets and destroy them. When you destroy all of them, you get open to another section of the world where a dice will roll and you'll get a reward. And the reward is of, I'll say, two flavors. One will increase your damage and one will increase your speed. And when you get your power up or your reward, then you go back and you essentially repeat, where you destroy more turrets and yada, yada, yada. And I really like the idea. I implemented a lot more power-ups, a lot more elaborate roll of the dice mechanics for this. And yeah, I just ran out of time and overscoped it. But I did get it out the door, and it is available on itch.io. Then we're moving on to September 2022. So if you remember, I've moved a Bridges release back again, but still was not ready. But I was also tired of moving the release date back at this point. So I decided to move it back one more time. But this time I was not going to move it, and I decided to schedule it for October 14th specifically. So in September, I really was doing all the preparation for release, reaching out to press, YouTubers, signing up for awards, fixing bugs here and there, just doing lots of little quality of life things that I think it needed, and making a press kit and just little things like that. Then when October 2022 came around, I released a bridge, and this was a very exciting moment, and probably a moment I will always remember, in that it took me like 27 months, almost 2.5 years, well, a little less than 2.5 years, to be able to work on something that long and stay with it, even when I didn't want to work on it, and having the discipline and being able to show people and actually release a fully functional game on Steam. Like, I'm a part of Steam now. Very exciting. And if you want to know a little bit more details, I did write a blog about this, which is on my website, which is eventidegamesstudio.com. And that, I have very fond memories of that day. And it was very exciting releasing it, just doing all the day-to-day stuff. I even took off work for it, just so I could make sure that everything ran smoothly. And then we had a big pizza party at the end with my family. That day also came with lots of issues, even with respect to the game, of people talking about the VAT, which is the value add-on tax for, I'll say, non-US countries, and just realizing that there were some quality of life features. I actually released it with a soft lock which I think I talk about more in the blog and I could talk about later, but that was not exciting to get messages about at your pizza party for your release that, hey, I can't play your game. So that was fun. And then really just thinking about all the features and stuff that I wanted to add. After that, maybe I couldn't quite fit into the release. And I actually still want to do a proper post-mortem about a bridge. And maybe I can get to that later. But at this point, I keep working into November of 2022. And slowly a bridge is starting to reach a point of stability, meaning there's really no issues issues, air quotes, with it. There's no soft locks, even though there was one case where I fixed one thing and then I introduced a new soft lock. Things like that I had vetted out, and just adding quality of life features to whether it be the UI, fixing grammar, adding little tweaks here and there. I also started getting interest in game engines and C++ again at this point. And I ended up releasing a Minesweeper clone after I followed a game dev TV's tutorial. And I used their VS Code workspace, and that was a lot of fun to learn about C++ and really how it worked. Then once December 2022 came around, honestly, I was exhausted just from all the stress of a Bridges release and everything I had been doing, that I decided to just take a break. Then when January 2023 came around, there I participated in the R Solo Development Winter Game Jam, where the theme was The End is Near, and I made a game called The Lighthouse Hero. And to be honest, I still love this idea to this day. Maybe it's not the most marketable, but I still think it's a fun idea. And it's the idea that a town has lost power, you are in a lighthouse, and you essentially use your light from the lighthouse to guide the boats and not make them hit the shore, which is, I think, a fun idea. You essentially point your light and it'll redirect the boats away from you. And there's like little ships that go around, and they are different sizes. There's like a small, medium, and large. Their speed is inversely proportional, so the smaller ones move faster while the bigger ones move slower. And when they collide, they make this fun kind of quirky noise. You can like overheat if you just hold the light for too long. It'll just slowly essentially die, so you have to kind of manage it, which adds another little bit of depth and complexity. There's like a small scoring system. So it was a really fun idea. The motivation really for doing, I'll say, that style of project was, I heard a lot about raycasts, but I never really learned a way to really use them well. And I needed an idea to be able to support that. And I thought the light casting out of the lighthouse really gave way to me to learn more about raycasts. So a lot of the tech, so to speak, that is in that game is a reflection of that, which I don't think would be able to share otherwise, unlike a game or like a podcast like this. So this is like one reason why I can share kind of details like that. Looping back, we're still in January 2023. I had stopped blogging at this point. It just was becoming a little bit too tedious to manage to do the level of research that I wanted. Honestly, I was comparing myself to, what's his name? I gotta look up his name real quick. So I was reading a lot of Chris Zukowski's How to Market a Game blog, and I was really using that as my sort of guiding light. And he does that full time, and I am doing this blogging that is as like a hobby to my hobby. So to be able to try to reach that point of the level of quality and the data to be able to back it up and provide his thoughts and do the editing, I was a bit over ambitious with what I was expecting for it. And as a result of that, I just don't feel like I could have done the quality of it. And then again, going back to, I just want to be able to do more game development and something that helps me support game development. And blogging, I didn't really see that doing that. It felt more of a chore to be able to write these blogs. However, I did keep reading. And so that's a point I will get to, I think, more later about the books I've read. I also started to slow down quite a bit at this point. Game dev, post-release blues, I will say, are definitely a thing. You definitely feel lost, because after working on this thing, which for me was a bridge, for little less than 2.5 years, and then be able to not do anything is quite the stark contrast of motivation of like, okay, well, like that's it. Like, what's the next thing? And I think there's an episode in Game Develop Repeat that Chris, who is Anxious Buddha, I believe, really describes the feeling, I think, a lot better than I can right now. And I definitely recommend watching his podcast where he talks about this post-game development release blues or whatnot. But anyway, we will continue on to April 2023, where a bridge fixes really were just kept coming. And just doing more small fixes here and there, but they're not like big innovative features, because the game is done at that point. And it's kind of like a more interesting point of like, now you're now supporting this thing, you're not developing it, which is a very big interest because you're moving from creation to more of stability, and it just requires more of a maintenance to it. And you don't want to make too big of a change because it is something at this point people are paying for, and it is something that people do expect a certain level of quality to. And you don't, at least I didn't want to create too big of a contrast of features that could definitely maybe harm the game anyway. So I was just kept doing small updates here and there. In May of 2023, I participated in Ludum Dare, where the theme was delivery. In that game jam, I made a game called Blast Belt, which was an explosive automation factory sim. I really like this idea too. My idea was you have grenades, they need to get transported to a factory. If they fall off the factory line, they explode. But the factory is not built in, I'll say, the most optimal way. So you actually have to build the factory line to be able to transport it safely. So you're placing, I'll say, a limited number of blocks, or the factory line, air quotes, to be able to guide these explosives from point A to point B. Again, the explosives are actually color-coded too, so you can't, like, you have explosive A, it has to go to the end of the right factory line, and then you have explosive B, it needs to go to a different factory line. So you have to be able to make the line in one way, then destroy it, and then rebuild it. And meanwhile, it's not like a direct line, like there's obstacles in the way, and so you need to do it. And then this is all on a timer, which is the way I just implemented it because it was the easiest at that point, where the game just starts after a certain amount of time, and then it'll tell you when a different explosive is coming. And that is still, I think, a fun idea. So moving on to June of 2023, a bridge had got its latest fix at that point, which is still the latest fix to this day. Then in July of 2023, I participated in the GMT Game Jam, which the theme was roles reversed. And in that, I made the game called Maze Craze. Maze Craze, and how I incorporated the theme as roles reversed, was instead of controlling a player in a maze, you control the maze and the player just automatically walks around it. And this was actually a really fun game to develop because I never done a lot with AI. I didn't want to do pathfinding because I feel like that would have made it too easy, but also I don't know how to do pathfinding right now. I've experimented with it here and there, but doing pathfinding, I think, took away from the idea of needing to guide the player if it already knew where it was going to go. So I built more of a state machine style AI for the player. If it would just always move when it encountered an obstacle based off of what was around it. It would either move in a different direction or the opposite direction. So if it approached like a wall, it would have certain triggers around it to say, okay, what am I colliding with? And then what is my next move? And then it would go and then move. And people seem to have liked it. It actually got a lot more feedback than I was anticipating for it. I remember I was doing this. All games I made up to this point have been in Unity, which I also don't think I've mentioned yet. And the tile map system in Unity, I am not, I'll say, the biggest fan of. It's a little quirky to work with, and I had to do some really hacky stuff in Maze Craze to be able to get it to work. And that's one thing besides the whole AI and the game's premise that I remember from making this game. Then in September of 2023, Unity announced its pricing plans, and that whole debacle with downloading games and developers getting charged. That's when all that happened. So at that point, I had really mixed feelings about Unity. I was not sold on just jumping right away because obviously I had a bridge which was also developed in Unity. I didn't want to walk away from it. I actually had a lot of knowledge with Unity, so it's just a lot of risk management, and in order to mitigate that risk, I wanted to do more of an experiment on myself to experiment with different game engines, which is something I had not really tried. So I decided to experiment with Godot, Unreal, but also making my own game engine with C++ and using a C++ framework. Then in October of 2023, I made a Pong clone using SDL and C++. I then tried to learn Unreal with a gamedev.tv tutorial, and it really just did not click with me. I, being a programmer, liked the text editor, and visual scripting felt actually much nicer than being a text. The visual scripting in Unreal is obviously very good, and that felt a lot better to me to be able to use that. The nomenclature, I think, is going to be confusing when you're first learning a new engine. But when I tried to do the coding, so to speak, with Unreal and C++, it just felt really clunky. So it really, just because of all that, it didn't really click with me as much. So I actually didn't even make a game in it, and I just moved on. And then in November of 2023, I decided to use Godot, and I made a game called Game Engine Battle Simulator. And the idea is that it is an auto battler game where the game engines essentially try to just duke it out. It's a very simple game. Each sort of team is a game engine. So you have Unity, Godot, and Unreal. When they collide with each other, they have like a rock, paper, scissors evaluation that goes on. I don't remember the exact, I don't want to say like win conditions. Like if Godot hits Unity, like what happens? Does Unity get Godot, or did Godot get Unity? That kind of a thing. But when they hit, essentially converted it. Also did a little bit of very simple AI. If it would just search for its nearest partner to win against, to basically try to be a threat to the other the other team. And that was a lot of fun. I did tutorials to follow Godot, and it really, I'll say, clicked with me. I had definitely kind of a naive view of Godot because of GDScript. I originally wanted to use C++ because coming from Unity, I wanted to try to save all that C# knowledge that I had developed with Unity. And in that process, I actually really learned that I know C# in Unity. I don't know C# in general. And that was a very important difference for me of once I started to need to know C# oriented things of knowing, I know what an object is, but with respect to the C# framework and how that framework works with Godot and how they talk to each other, so to speak, and the tutorials and documentation that was available, it really just wasn't that easy for, I'll say, me to learn, at least at the beginning. So I decided to really choose Godot to, I'll say, keep working on games, but using the GDScript. And that's what I ended up using for the Game Engine Battle Simulator. And that I thought clicked a lot better for me, being it's more of like a Python style language. It's definitely much easier to read. It definitely doesn't have the kind of naive view of it's not like a quote unquote like true programmer. It's not like C# or a C based language, which I am very big fan of. And it's just something I was not used to. I mean, I have programmed in Python before, but not done any games in Python quite yet. I know there's like things like Pygame, which allows you to do that, but I had no experience with that. So Godot, being able to make games in this different language that wasn't C-based was a little bit of a learning curve, but once it finally clicked that I could know the nomenclature, know things like nodes, all the other different interactables that you can use, learning the editor, which is another big deal, really resonated with me and is essentially the game engine that I started to continue to use until this day. I've not gone back to Unity as well, which we can talk to more about that later. But continuing with our timeline, so we have December of 2023. I ended up getting a new job where I was going to start to work from home, but then I would need to move to Northern California. So at this point, I'm working in Southern California, but also working from home. Then in January 2024, because I had moved, I'd also saved money, and that granted me the opportunity to actually buy a house. And so I actually did buy a house in Northern California, which is very exciting. Then in February of 2024, I moved from Southern California to Northern California. As far as game development goes, I actually started to make my own game engine in C and SDL. And this really was just more of a learning experiment because I wanted to be able to build more of like a framework that I could keep reusing in all my games. And given that I had more C knowledge and I still wanted to pursue more game engine development at that time, Godot still felt really good to work with, but I still needed to and wanted to practice my programming as I was going into this new job. But then there was also something that happened in 2024, and that was the release of Balatro. And the reason that is important because in the next month of March 2024, I played a lot of this game, and I honestly really enjoyed this game. And as a result of it, I actually started working on a new game idea that I had for this. It's a roguelike deck building game that is inspired by Bullet Show and the card game War. It's something I've been working on since this point. It's slowly being prototyped here and there. I'm designing it. I've been working on it for March to July. So that's at least 4 months now of off and on work, because this is a hobby for me. And I think that gets us about caught up to where we're at today. The other things I want to mention just from the initial release of the podcast till today was that I did work full time this entire time. And this, while it is definitely a lot of things I've done, I've not let it affect my life or my lifestyle that I want. I did go on plenty of vacations and spend plenty of time with my family. A few things I did is I went to Hawaii with my family. I hung out at the river and the lake. I rode ATVs in the desert. I even went overseas to see a friend's wedding in Thailand, and that was a very fun experience. I watched lots of football, watched other sports, golfed a little bit, plenty of TVs and movies. I also had a few abandoned game dev projects at this time. At one point I was really into Crypto the Necrodancer, and I really wanted to make a game similar to that. I don't know what game engine I was using actually. I think it was Unity, but this was also pre-Unity debacle. Got some basic sprites working, got pathfinding working on a grid. Eventually it just fizzled out. I made like a little mobile game to just see how mobile games work through Unity. Growing up, I remember this game called Backyard Football, and there was this whole backyard series of games, and I still loved all of these games. I specifically loved the Backyard Football, so I wanted to reinvent this, so to speak, in the modern time. There was also this game idea I had that was similar to Enter the Gungeon. It had a little bit more of a constraint on the gunplay, but it had this really deep roguelike element and story. This game fizzled out quite quickly when I realized the amount of content it would need, and scope creep essentially told me to put that game idea aside, at least for now. Then during this time, I also played a lot of games. So some honorable mentions, so to speak, of ones I played from, I'll say 2021 to pre-2024 were the Jackbox Party Pack, Gris, Hades, Factorio. Like, I spent so much time in Factorio. It was really fun. I played a lot of XCOM 2, Hollow Knight, Pinstripe, Neversong, Islanders, Mortal Glory, Dark, FTL, Spelunky, Crypto the Necrodancer, Downwell. And then this year, I have played a lot more games as of recently. Some of those being Lineth, Superflight, Soot, Death's Door, Omno, O-M-N-O, Risk of Rain 2, great game, Crossroads OS, Helldivers, Braid, Anniversary Edition, Inscription, Deep Rock Galactic, Hades 2, Radtropolis, Crashlands, Slay the Spire, and of course Balatro. Like I said, I think earlier I was listening to a lot of podcasts too, which I don't know if I mentioned in this podcast, but in the previous one I did. Some of the ones that I kind of want to list here that I think are really good, or at least ones I've listened to all the way through, or at least most of them, are the Game Dev Field Guide, Distinguished Humans, Indie Game Dev Club, Game Develop Repeat, Make the Game with Matt Hackett, Level Design Lobby, Game Dev Loadout, Indie Game Development Podcasts by Sasquatch B Studios. I've listened to almost all of these, whether it's between travel or working out. I definitely recommend these to anyone listening that is interested in game dev. I think they're all great resources, and they provide their own valuable insight and perspective of game development. I also said that I've been reading a lot, and since I started reading more consistently in 2022, I've read about 18 books, which, being a not reader for, I'll say, most of my life, this was a really big deal to me. 10 of them are game dev related. So to name a few, I have The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses by Jesse Schell. There's The Level Up, The Guide to Great Video Game Design by Scott Rogers. Jason, I'm going to butcher his name, so sorry, Shania Ryder, but it's Blood, Sweat, and Pixels and Press Reset are both books by him. There's Spelunky, which is by Derek Yu. Let's think of another one. And right now I'm reading Rules of Play, Game Design Fundamentals. So that should get us caught up to the current day. Kind of to summarize it, like I really have been putting a lot of effort into learning game dev, programming, game design, hobbies, despite everything happening in life, that it's more of I wanted to learn. And it has been, I think, a really fun and awesome journey so far, an adventure with its definite ups and downs, ebbs and flows, motivation and not having motivation at all sometimes. But it's something that like I do see myself continuing to do, at least for the current time. Then I guess that's kind of ending the catch-up part. Moving on to more current life updates. I mentioned I played Helldivers. And ever since Helldivers came out, which Helldivers we'll probably talk about in another episode. Great game. Love the role-playing aspect, and that's probably the thing that I love most about it. So that came out about March of this year. When I started playing that, I put about like 20 to 30 hours into it. My wrist actually started hurting quite a bit from all those stratagems and for fighting for democracy. It's been a really slow ache ever since I played that game, but now it's affecting me quite a bit and a lot more than I was expecting. And then in combination with not only playing games, but wanting to prototype this roguelike deck builder game, and programming and typing, after work, but also typing a lot during work, and then playing games, like everything revolves around the computer and typing. Then my wrist, I think, just had its moments, and finally it's catching up to me with all the years, which I've been doing game development for 4 years now, pretty consistently. More of a time to... And when you identify issues and things maybe hurting or like don't avoid them, take action. Try to use ergonomic stuff when you can. Like I got a new ergonomic keyboard. I've had a sit-stand desk for some time now, and it's been a very big help to be able to use one. Just be conscious of your mouse position, monitor height. If you have multiple monitors, laptops, things like that. Maybe something to be conscious about, because I think I wouldn't say a poster child, but hearing about all these aches and pains of oh no, that won't happen to me. And then here I am, in all those aches and pains that I had avoiding for some time. So game development and programming has been really slow, or basically I'm just not able to do it. So in the meantime, I have been learning more about art and working on game design in the meantime. I have not stopped playing games though. Recently in the Steam summer sale, got a few games. One of them being Crashlands, which I really enjoy Crashlands. The other one being Tunic, I haven't got to that. But Crashlands, I actually didn't expect to really like it as much as I did, for the reason that survival craft games are not exactly my thing. And after playing Crashlands, the survival craft in that game is actually very good. And I think the reason why I don't like survival craft games a lot is because it's more of the gathering of the resources. I still find that quite uninteresting, but also that the feedback loops in survival crafts are rather large, but they're also small in the sense that you gather resources to go to, in Crashlands it's a station, to be able to build something more effective, or you needed to accomplish a quest. So I guess I'm learning more about how, even though it's a genre that I wouldn't like, it definitely has elements that maybe I think about them differently. And a few of the systems that I find very interesting about how it takes into account are one of the combat, but it's also the questing. The combat, I'm used to more action-oriented combat that is like Hades has a great combat system. It feels depth. There's a lot of depth to it. You have a really nice move set to it where you can do specials. You have a cast. You can dash. You can kind of link these elements together to make a dash attack. Then you also have different weapons that do very different things. So you have a sword, a spear, a shield. There's a gun-like one. You have fists. Where in Crashlands, you really just have one slot, so to speak. And right now where I'm at the game, you basically have a sword, I think it's an axe, and a hammer. And the difference is that the rate of attack and the damage it does. But the reason I bring all that up for context is because what I like about it is it feels like a mini game more than the actual, this fully in-depth combat of you really have to know the enemies. And at the beginning, you will die a lot because of the combat, because you don't realize how underpowered you are with respect to the enemies. And I think that's something it indirectly teaches pretty well of like, you're on this alien planet. This alien planet is not going to hold back on you just because you're new to it. So you really have to learn how the enemy AI works to be able to take care of it. Being that you also have like underpowered weapons is, another aspect of also kind of the grindiness, which is something I also don't like, which kind of links back to the gathering of like you're doing something to do something else. So it's kind of feels like it's in the way. But because you have to know the AI, it almost feels like this nice song and dance of once you figure out how an enemy operates. So like one of the enemies is called a wombat, which is like this dinosaur like head thing with one leg, which is crazy to think about, but just stay with me here. Once you understand how it works, you can essentially use the mechanics to essentially avoid its attacks. So it actually feels very nice when you add other enemies. There's one called like a glyphon, and it's like this little blue squid-like thing that can fly around. It has more of a dash attack, or the wompits have more of they jump and do like an area of effect kind of a thing. So when you understand that, you can essentially avoid their attacks a lot easier. And it just feels really good of knowing you've quote unquote master this enemy and know what resources they drop, so you can predictably take them out. As you get stronger, you just take them out faster. And like this combat just feels really nice. It doesn't feel overly complicated. From the dev perspective, it actually is very seamless. They do lots of things to save on the resources they have at this point. They have this area of effect attack, and they have this dash attack. The dash attack, which I've encountered more enemies as the game has gone on, which I think I'm like a little over 6 hours into at this point. Some of them are quicker. There's quicker in the sense of they move faster, they dash faster, they dash towards you. The width of the range of attack is wider. They can combo this dash with more of an area effect, like the womp pit style of attack. There's harder enemies that have more health, so they do more damage. So that obviously you can't take enough hits. So you have to be mindful of that, which is, again, something you'll learn as you go. And I think they all feel like different mini games like you're playing, which I think is an interesting way to go about combat rather than it. Because at the core, combat is really just trying to solve a problem. And the problem is the enemy needs to die. And I had this weird thought during the game of like, it just feels like I'm hitting the enemy with my piece of metal, which at the core, that's actually what combat is, but it's funny to see it from that lens. So that's kind of a long rant and ramble about his combat system. The other thing I thought was really innovative at this point of me playing Crashlands is its questing system. And the reason I think it's innovative is because typically in a game, it goes through this dialogue sequence of, oh yeah, we do this, you do that, whatnot. Your characters are going back and forth. And then when you're done talking, it just tells you, go do this or go get this item, bring it back to me. And that will show up in its kind of own sort of to-do list. And that's really what a quest system is. It's just really a to-do list. But the reason I think that the Crashlands quest system is innovative is that it actually uses the dialogue itself as the quest log. So you have to read the dialogue to actually understand the quest. And that definitely feels like it is a lot more organic and fits the world a lot better, but it also keeps you more engaged as the player too, because you realize, oh, I actually need to pay attention to what is happening in the game. Like you can't just phase out when the dialogue happens with, another game that might do something similar or something different of doing this separate dialogue from the quest, where Crashlands kind of merges the dialogue or the narrative or however you want to talk about it into the quest itself. So when you go to like your menu, you actually read the quest, meaning you actually read the narrative again to understand, oh, what are the things they're asking for and where do I need to be able to accomplish this task that they're asking me. And I think that's a very good way to approach it. It definitely saves resources. You don't need to write more things because, the text is the actual quest. So when you're writing the dialogue, obviously it kind of double counts in a way. So that to me saves resources, and resources from the dev perspective if you're really just doing the same thing. But that same thing is accomplishing more, which is solving more problems, which is honestly a good solution to multiple problems, which is what I think we want, and it saves more time in the long run. So that's kind of my initial thoughts about Crashlands, and I really like it so far. I'll probably get back to you later about more I've encountered with it. It's a survival craft, so I've got lots more stations, a lot more quests to do. The story is developing here and there. I think I'm still pretty early in the game, kind of cheating from listening to their podcasts from such a long time ago and understanding in terms of hours of where I'm at. There are a couple of surprises that I've encountered already, which have been pretty delightful, and they're unexpected, which I think are really fun. So I guess with that, I'll probably close this out. So I guess, thank you again for listening, and I guess I'll hope to talk to you again in the next episode. So thank you.